welcome to Conversations with Consequences. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association, where we aim to change the culture one conversation at a time. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern, or catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on Sirius XM channel 130. Of course, our radio show is also a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org or directly to wherever you listen to your podcast. Welcome to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Ashley McGuire.
And I'm Mary Fiorito.
And we are very happy to have with us today one of Mary's colleagues from the Ethics and Public Policy Center and a new voice on the show, Clare Morell. She is the woman behind the Technology and Human Flourishing Project at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and she has worked at the Department of Justice as well as at the White House Counsel's Office, and she's working on a new book called The Tech Exit, a practical guide to freeing kids and teens from smartphones. And Clare has also just authored a letter that was published in First Things, along with several other prominent Catholics and thought leaders this week, called A Future for the Family, a New Technology Agenda for the Right. Thanks for taking the time to join us today, Clare.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So, Clare, there is a lot of prominent, familiar faces from different avenues of the conservative movement that signed your letter. I saw Professor Robbie George of Princeton, Ryan Anderson, Carter Snead. Tell us what prompted this letter.
Yeah, this letter has actually been in the works for probably almost a year and a half now, and was born out of just a lot of conversations with friends of mine who are my fellow co-authors, that a lot of the pressing political questions of our day focus around issues of technology. And not that they're technological questions, but a lot of moral and ethical and political questions, I think, are coming to the forefront with advances in new technology. And we felt like there needed to be some type of cohesive vision on the right for how to govern technology well towards the flourishing of the family and towards human flourishing and the protection of human dignity. Because technological progress, kind of unrestrained, does not always result in the best result for human beings and the family. It can often just be what result gives businesses the most profit. And so we felt like, particularly with the new administration coming in, that it was a really pivotal time to try to get this out, and particularly to try to get a wide range of signatories on it, to really try to actually form a broader coalition. We might have disagreements on other political issues, but if we could develop a set of principles that a pretty wide swath of conservatives could sign on to, that was the goal, to try to have some common ground, common principles to encourage the government to use in assessing technologies and thinking about how to govern them towards those ends for the family and for human flourishing. So that was kind of the impetus. It was a work in progress for a while, and then after the election in November, it really kind of put a fire under us to get this out in January, so that it would be useful for the new administration and new Congress.
Well, it certainly is a concern, Clare, that unites people across the globe, parents of any age, with children of any age. I just saw in the news the other day something about Princess Catherine, the Princess of Wales, visiting, early childhood is sort of the issue that she's taken on as her kind of primary work. And one of the questions that was raised during this last visit that she did to a museum, I think it was whether or not Prince George was going to get a cell phone when he turned 12. And that a lot of families, in Great Britain were questioning that, what they would do and how they would protect him, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, they would have other concerns layered onto him being on a cell phone that we wouldn't have. But one of the things you say in the letter that was so powerful, Clare, is technology is meant to empower the human person. We have seen, however, that if left ungoverned, technological advancement too easily comes to hinder human flourishing and threatens the human person and the family. So you're stressing there, it seems to me, the need to have this technology, but it has to be technology that serves the family.
That's exactly right. And I think, we can all think about this in our own minds, right? Technologies that have actually improved the human condition. I mean, like eyeglasses are are a
Hmm.
technology that have really improved the human condition. It's restored sight, helped people to see. There are so many examples of technologies that have been empowering of the human person, allowing them to be productive in their work, allowing people to be healthy, and to even just go about their lives in ways that are easier or more convenient. But I think our just assessment of a lot of the current, particularly digital technologies, are that they actually are undermining what it means to flourish as a human being. A lot of
Hmm.
these digital technologies, as you're mentioning, like smartphones, are inherently addicting and so kind of overpower what we would consider to be someone's actual kind of best interests, their independence, their ability to have self control or emotional regulation, which are needed to be a flourishing adult. That kids with these digital technologies is really that is being undermined and their ability to develop that. And so these technologies are not empowering of the human person, they're disempowering and they're actually harming, particularly when you mention that stage of development or early childhood development, that these are really critical stages in the human person's life, stages where they're laying a foundation in their brain and their body for their adult life. And so we want to be particularly protective of those stages. And in a lot of ways, our technologies today are not flourishing or empowering that development, but they're hindering it.
Just to echo what Mary said, I honestly can't think of any issue area or thing that probably causes more conflict within families than technology. And so this line in the letter stood out where you write, we must discern prudent ways to govern technology in order to keep the human person, human dignity, and the common good as the central goals of our politics. We must ensure that the new technologies serve human life and the human family, not the other way around. And I feel like every parent is struggling with this, including, as Mary points out, the Princess of Wales, where it feels like we're sort of servants to technology and just trying to wrest our children back. And it's
Mhm.
the goalposts are constantly shifting. I mean, we make one rule and then another type of technology comes up. But you offer 10 points or 10 break this down into 10 areas. And I
Yeah.
I was intrigued by number two, where you say support women in their natural ability to conceive, gestate, birth, and nurture children, rather than to seek to bypass or short circuit the female body or reduce its organs for rent. And I think about how the last 50 years, it seems like all of the technological advances in the field of fertility have gone towards shutting women's fertility down or taking it away from them. Can you give a few examples of concretely what that would look like for number two? I mean, this new Oura ring jumps to mind. I just saw that Wall Street Journal did an article on it, a smart ring that can tell you
Yeah.
when you're fertile. But what are some other examples of ways, technologies that can help promote a woman's natural fertility?
Yeah, and this is great. And I should just say, this is not necessarily my area of expertise. So I'm happy to give a little bit of general statements to this. But I will just give a shout out to my co-author, Emma Waters, who has done a lot in this space if listeners want to look up any of her work. Um, Basically what we were trying to say is that unfortunately we feel like a lot of the technologies have not focused on the root issue that if couples are experiencing infertility we should be trying to pursue medical advancements that actually help solve the underlying issue behind that infertility. What needs to be resolved instead, like you mentioned, Ashley, it feels like that's just completely being bypassed. And they're like, you know what? Instead, you can do this. You can have a surrogate have your baby, or you can have, just do IVF. Like these are easy solutions. You don't have to even worry about these underlying infertility issues. And so we were trying to say, there's ways to take technology and say, we recognize this as an issue. We want to actually help women solve their health issues to have babies, and not just feel like our technology then all of a sudden just needs to bypass that. And so that was kind of the emphasis behind that statement. And like you mentioned, there are new technologies that are helpful, like these smart rings that can tell you exactly when you're ovulating and help you track your cycle. And Friends in the medical profession have said a woman's cycle is often the indicator of her overall health, that they can even tell that if something looks abnormal in her cycle, that there could be other underlying issues, and those underlying issues could be behind some of the struggles with infertility. And so it's a great tool, that there are these more data points available, through the Oura Ring or through other means to actually help solve some of the underlying things. And so that was the kind of whole emphasis of the statement, is that we people should be the ones governing the technology, not the other way around. The technology should not be governing us, it should be serving us. And so that's where the government does have a role in kind of directing where we want this technology to go. And so we could easily say we want technology to invest in development towards solving these underlying kind of infertility health issues, not to just be bypassing a woman's natural ability to gestate and birth a child with these kind of cheap hacks of, artificial ways to do that. So, yeah, we're just
And
trying
that,
yeah.
yeah, I was going to say that, of course, would be of great service to women in, third world countries who don't have medical and, uh, over-the-counter pill solutions to everything in their lives, right? So I know Mother Teresa's sisters had a great deal of success teaching, natural family planning in places, very impoverished places in India, because the women they were working with didn't go to the pharmacy anytime they needed something. So they just didn't have access to it. But the
Yeah.
the the third principle that you raise speaks to, one of these great infestations on the internet, which is pornography. My
Mm,
husband is a IT network engineer and IT security person, and he was doing some work in a Catholic elementary school. This is like 15 years ago, and he was just checking the firewalls. And he came in and he said, well, the fourth and fifth grade boys were at it again today. He could tell in the 40 minutes, whatever each of those two classes of boys were on computers in the computer lab, more than 100 hits on different porn sites. And of course, he had installed every firewall known to God and man on it in a Catholic school. But he said what was frightening to him, it wasn't just that they were boys will be boys and they were looking. They knew the names of very specific sites. That's what they were trying, so it's obviously they knew that either from their phones or from home.
mm,
And this is just becoming increasingly alarming. And the ease in which people can get it, but especially boys at the ages in which their brains are still being wired in this way. I have a dear friend who's a canon lawyer and whose entire portfolio at the Chancery office where she works is people who have what they call non-consummatum cases, which are marriages that haven't been physically consummated because the husbands, in 90% of the case, it's husbands who have been addicted to porn.
mm. That's horrifying. No, this is exactly why we were trying to write this principle. Is I'm honestly just like worried that there is a generational crisis about to happen, like you're mentioning, because if these kids are growing up on pornography, they won't actually be able to form a relationship with another real human being, to form a marriage, to form a family. And we know that the family is the building block of our society, of our government, of civilization. And we are literally allowing that to be eroded and undermined by this online pornography epidemic. And it is an epidemic because of the proportions of which this stuff is available online and the fact that smartphones are in kids' pockets now. So it's not just on a computer, it's 24/7 access. It's impossible for parents to effectively shut this all down on a smartphone when there are hundreds of apps. Every app has an in app browser to the internet. Often, external filters that parents control don't operate inside of apps. And the kids are so smart. They have all these workarounds to get to
Right.
these things, and they often don't even go looking for it. I think there was a statistic, it's like 58% of kids surveyed had stumbled across it accidentally. Like more than half, they weren't looking for it. It was fed to them on social media. They clicked on a link, and before they knew it, they were on a porn site. And it's happening at younger and younger ages. I think the average age of porn exposure is now close to 10. And it's just the kind of porn is also extremely addicting. It is kind of it's the social media model has really kind of come to pornography. And so it's these algorithms are very sophisticated, and it will continue to feed you more and more, kind of increasingly escalating content. And so the kinds of things kids are seeing is just, it's absolutely horrifying, very degrading and dehumanizing and violent. A lot of it is just filled with violence. And to your point about the school day, over a third of kids have seen pornography during the school day. 44% of that amount was on a school issued device,
Mhm.
which is also part of the problem is now Chromebooks and laptops and tablets are in every classroom. And those are very difficult for a teacher to completely oversee effectively when they have 20 something students in a class to make sure a kid isn't accessing something on the school issued device. And so we've surrounded children with devices that just have thousands of portals to the internet where these things are so accessible and it's just become like the Wild West. And we've just kind of given our kids over to these things. And so, I mean, there's a lot of public policy solutions that I've been part of trying to attack this kind of pornography angle pornography issue from a lot of different angles. But that principle we felt like was really important to put in the statement because we wanted to call attention to that our technology has led us to this point, and so something needs to change.
The Chromebook thing really that jumped out to me because at my daughter's previous school, which is a good parochial school, they were really pushing Chromebooks. And it got to the point where her entire fifth grade year, she didn't do any homework that wasn't done on her entire year. All of her homework was done on a Chromebook.
Mm.
And we switched her to a school that doesn't even allow them to get email addresses until high school. And interestingly, a friend who ended up moving over the following year had to take a math placement test, and the friend's mom told me she was worried her daughter wouldn't remember how to use a pencil. I
Mm.
don't think she was joking. That's like a double-edged crisis because as you point out, one, these kids are, as Jonathan Haidt has said, under we're overprotecting them in the real
Yeah,
world, underprotecting them in this virtual hellscape.
yeah.
So you've got, fourth graders with Chromebooks and accessing pornography, but then you also have the loss of the traditional textbook experience. So I was kind of juiced to see the actual word textbook, get more textbooks back in the classroom. I mean, is that doable?
I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle. But to your point, the screen-based education has been like a twofold problem. Part of it is like they can just access way too many distractions on the screen. But the second is more and more studies come out that just show that kids don't learn as well on a screen. That literacy rates, I mean, are at like an all-time low in the United States, reading scores. Because some brain studies that have been done by different universities show that kids don't actually comprehend text as deeply as they read it on a screen versus in paper. It's harder for them to actually learn their letters, obviously the building block for literacy, if they're doing that on a screen instead of writing it out by hand, that there's actually something about handwriting that actually improves memory and recall and retention of all these things. And so there's actually there's science supports that it's better for children to learn by pen and paper than it is on a screen. And so I think what was seen by ed tech as like this is going to be the next generation in education, we're going to have just an easy way for kids to be adept for the digital age is actually really undermining the skills that anyone would need to thrive professionally and academically even in a more technological age. That the first kind of building block of any learning is learning how to read and then learning how to problem solve and think critically. And it's very interesting. It's not just about information transmission. If that's all that we were after, you could say, oh, it's okay. Screens are the future. We're just transmitting information now in a faster way. They don't need to learn how to read an actual book. But something about learning how to read, it does something for your brain development. It actually helps you to problem solve and think critically. And critical thinking is what we need for our economy. I mean, that's like we need to be able to solve problems in the future, whether we have new kinds of technology or not. And so I think a huge myth that has been sold to schools and sold to parents is that if you want your child to succeed in this day and age that is so digital and is so online in terms of our commerce and economy, they need to be savvy at tech. And that's just not true. They need to know how to think critically and know how to read, but it's actually quite simple and intuitive to like learn the technology. But they need those primary things in place. And the best way to do that is through pen and paper and moving back to books. I'm encouraged, I would just say, I feel like there's been a real revival in like classical private schools, Catholic schools, Christian schools, even just like homeschooling. I just feel like I talk to more and more parents at my church and churches in the area that more and more parents are really prioritizing that type of model of education. And now, unfortunately, not everyone has the privilege to make that choice. And so I do think we really need to do better in the public school system. Unfortunately, I think it's going to take quite a bit of time to unwind because of how entrenched and dependent the system has become on the tech, particularly for teachers. It's like the entire way they grade things, right? It's like all the students do the assignments and assessments on the screen. It makes it very easy for the teacher to grade. They have all the records kept that way. So it would take some serious undoing. But I think at a minimum, a starting point is just to say, like, okay, you may have to use the screen for these purposes, but let's bring books back into the classroom. Let's have physical books around. Like there are still things you can do in the meantime as we're working to try to unwind some of this screen-based education. Just trying to get kids reading physical books is a huge step. And for parents who have their kids in the public school system, I would say even outside of school hours, just try to get your kids around physical books. They have to use the screens during the school day. Try to get them off of them after the school day ends and get them reading physical books and playing outside would be my recommendations.
I saw that the Smithsonian is looking for people who can read cursive because they're doing a historical project on, I think, letters written back and forth between servicemen overseas and people here during the Second World War. And they didn't have enough people on their staff who could read cursive. So they put out, they want to hire people. They're looking, because they didn't have that skill set, which is terrifying to me. But it's also a nice way if you're trying to communicate with your spouse and you don't want the kids to know now. We just have to write each other in cursive. But one of the things you talk about that's really intriguing, though, Claire, is legislating towards a restored Republican culture in the digital age. What would legislation look like in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of little steps we can take legislatively. So I have been involved. The first kind of step I would say on a state or national level is working to get age verification in place for pornography websites. I mean, it seems very simple and common sense that if a child clicks through to Pornhub, they shouldn't be able to actually get through to see its content, that this should be restricted for minors. And that has taken off. 19 states have passed those laws. I'm hopeful the Supreme Court will uphold Texas's law and allow for these to go forward. So I would say that's just thinking about how we treat the physical world and translating that online is like a big gap right now. And so just taking steps to legislate in that direction to say we want the same kind of ways that we are protective of children in the real world to be matched online by age restricting certain kinds of content that we know is inappropriate or obscene for children. I think a lot of laws could be passed around social media. So states are stepping up in this area, either requiring parental consent, which, you'd say, how is that already not part of the process of a child making a social media account and entering this long terms and services contract with some giant tech company? Like a 13-year-old does that without a parent knowing. Right. So trying to put parents back in the equation has been a big part of legislation I've worked on, that parents have this kind of oversight and authority in the real world. They should on the online world as well. And so I think those are just a couple examples of steps we can take in terms of trying to protect children from the harms of some of these digital technologies and just trying to give parents more authority and oversight in terms of their kids' online behavior or experience. I would love to see exemptions for parents to opt out of screens in schools. I feel like we allow medical exemptions and things in all sorts of scenarios. And this has been a particular challenge for parents who have children who struggle with ADHD or other mental health disorders, that the screens can be extremely dysregulating for them and difficult for them to learn on during the school day. And it has been often an uphill battle for parents to get accommodations. And so I would just like to see that protected more, that a parent could have a right to say, I don't want my child completing the tests and assignments on the school issued device. I would like them to do this on pen and paper. So I think just trying to restore more authority to parents over their kids' digital experience and actually putting the parent back in the driver's seat rather than the child. And that's been my kind of narrow area of focus. There's a lot of other legislation, I think, that deal with some of the other principles, but that's just a little bit outside of my lane in terms of some of those other questions that we were talking about, like related to trying to help women with infertility challenges or things like that. But those are just a few examples of legislative solutions when it comes to looking at protecting kids online.
Well, Claire, We're almost out of time, but gosh, I could talk about this for another hour. I wish I could get your definition of the new household economy. I wish I could hear about what rewilding the American West means. I wish I was very interested in the idea of proximity. I think you call it right to repair and proximity. I'm like, does that mean, every time you try to get something fixed, you're not calling someone who's in India, stuff that's like essential for your life? I don't know what that means, but unfortunately, we're out of time. So I refer all of our listeners to the original article, which again is entitled A Future for the Family, a New Technology Agenda for the Right. And that can be found at First Things. And Claire, where can people follow some of the other initiatives you're tackling with your work at EPPC?
Yes, please do follow my work. So I have a scholar page at eppc.org, Clare Morell. It collects everything I write or model legislation or things I put out is all there. We also have a dedicated project page, the Technology and Human Flourishing Project, that specifically highlights those items. And then I also have a Substack, just Clare Morell, substack.com. And you can subscribe there if you want to hear updates from me when I release new articles or new legislation or things. And in particular, you mentioned in my bio my forthcoming book. And so I do have a book coming out June 3rd, specifically trying to help parents exit from these digital technologies for their kids and trying to show parents it's both possible and it is positive. It's a positive no to say yes to a better, more flourishing childhood. And so, yeah, just hoping to encourage and inspire parents with that book, and educators as well and policymakers can find lessons in it too. And that will come out June 3rd. And so, if you want to stay in the loop on that, my Substack, claremorell.substack.com, will have updates on that and let you all know when it comes available.
Well, I so agree with you that parents, I think, first and foremost, need to hear that it is possible that we can take back charge of our homes and our lives. But we thank you for all of the work that you're doing with this really worthwhile endeavor and for all the resources that you're providing to parents. And thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your time.
Oh, thank you all so much. It was a wonderful time.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences on EWTN Radio. I'm your hostess, Ashley McGuire, and I'm joined today by my TCA colleagues, Betsy Fentress, and our newest member, Mary Fiorito, who is also guest hosting. And we're excited to have a conversation together today about a really consequential topic. It's Black History Month, and the issue of race continues to be a fraught one in our country, but it's important to be able to step back, to talk about the issue, but really to reflect on and celebrate the extraordinary contributions of so many African Americans and everything that they have done throughout the history of our country to advance in so many different fields, as well as to push the civil rights movement forward. So, Mary, you have written about a woman that I had never heard of before, Dr. Mildred Jefferson. You wrote an article about her for the Knights of Columbus, and I was fascinated to read her story, the first African American woman to be admitted to Harvard Medical School. So, tell us about this extraordinary woman.
Oh, so she's one of these people that if she had represented the other side in the abortion debate, she'd be a household name. I mean, everyone would know who she was. She would, but because she was, first of all, so smart and so gifted, and second of all, so articulate on the pro-life issue, she's really sort of muted in Black history, if people know about her at all, as you point out. And so she was born in a small town in Texas that still had segregated schools. She went to a segregated elementary school as well as a high school. She was the daughter of a Methodist minister and a school teacher. She was an only child, and she was quite an academically gifted person. She was a prodigy, actually. She graduated from high school at 15. And then she was admitted into Harvard's medical school, but couldn't start until I think it was 21. They said they would accept her. So She got her college degree and then her master's degree in order to kill time while she was waiting for Harvard to let her in. And then she became, as you mentioned, the first Black woman to be admitted to Harvard's medical school. She also has a number of other distinctions. She was one of the first women of any color to complete a surgical rotation at Boston's hospital. And then she was, I think, head of surgery there as well. So just really made so many contributions, her pro-life work notwithstanding, just to the world of medicine. She was just a gifted, gifted doctor. And she became involved in the pro-life movement when she was living in Boston, of course, and the movement to expand legalized abortion. At this point, it was already legal in New York and in Colorado and in California and a couple of other states, I think. But the American Medical Association wanted to weigh in on it and was trying to impress upon their doctors the need to get involved on the pro-abortion side. And she was just indignant when she heard this. I think she understood what, Margaret Sanger said so plainly, the founder of Planned Parenthood, right? That we didn't want more children from Black people. We wanted less. And she understood the racial overtones of the abortion movement, which she saw as a eugenics movement. And so she got very, very involved. She helped to found National Right to Life. And also, I think probably one of the most important things she ever did is she influenced then Governor Ronald Reagan, who then became president, to change his mind on the abortion issue. He saw her on a talk show, on like a PBS show, and was so moved by what she had to say that he said, I wish I had met you and heard what you had to say before I signed pro-abortion legislation in California. And then, of course, when Reagan became president, he went on to, make judicial nominations, both at the, appellate court level, but also at the Supreme Court level, that allowed the gradual undoing of Roe versus Wade to occur.
Wow.
Mary, wasn't Dr. Bernard Nathanson from the Boston area?
He
Were they?
was. Hmm.
And what
Oh,
did they have any kind of a relationship
you,
regarding this?
yeah, Betsy, I take that back. He was from New York.
Okay.
He operated New York's largest abortion clinic for quite a
Hmm.
time. And as if you will remember, aborted his own child when he got his girlfriend pregnant. So, but certainly their paths would have crossed after Nathanson's conversion experience and, writing Aborting America, which was his book about what he did and how he lied during congressional testimony in order to get abortion legislation passed. So certainly they would have been of the same generation.
Well, you're absolutely right that if she had been on the other side, she would be a household name. But, I think with time, um, more and more heroines like her will become household names. I was surprised to learn from you, Betsy, that there are no Black American saints. Speaking of people who are not household names, but that there are a number whose causes have been put forward. Julia Greeley, I believe, is one. Tell us about some of these men and women.
There are currently 5 that are potentially on the road to sainthood: Pierre Toussaint, Sister Thea Bowman, Julia Greeley, Mother Mary Lang, Mother Henriette Henriette DeLille, and Father Augustus Tolton. And some of these are venerable now. But Julia Greeley's case really seems to be moving. It's a fascinating story. There's, I think, only one photograph of her that's ever
Mm.
emerged. And it's the Archdiocese of Denver, I think, is moving this forward. And she originally came to Denver to work as a housemaid for Governor William Gilpin in the 1870s. And she was poor, illiterate, never married, and was blind in one eye.
Mm.
And just jumping forward a little bit, there are 2 miracles associated with her involving people who had cancer. So I'm really excited about following this case and hoping that she is beatified.
And Father Augustus Tolton, whom you mentioned, the last whom you mentioned, who is now venerable, or servant of God, one of the two, but he died here in Chicago, where I am speaking to you from. And his cause was introduced by Cardinal Francis George, who I had the privilege of working for many years. And he actually, his parents, he and his mother escaped from Missouri, which was a slave state, into Illinois. And then he became a priest. He's the first black priest in the United States, but he had to be sent to Rome to be ordained because no seminary here would take him in the United States. And so when the Holy Father he went to the Roman seminary, and when he was being dispatched back to the United States, he actually asked to go to Africa, and he was told, "No, your real evangelization, your real missionary work is going to be in the United States." So he came back here as a priest, and very sadly was. Black people couldn't ride the streetcars in Chicago at that time, and there was a terrible heat wave in the middle of July, and he was walking from I believe, Holy Name Cathedral back to St. Monica's, which was the parish where he pastored, and 90-degree heat and terrible humidity, and he collapsed and died from a stroke, but he was only in his 30s.
So, Mary, you mentioned the slave trade and escapees, and I have kind of an interesting story on that front, which is that some of my family lives in the Chicago area near you, Mary, and one of them lived in a very old home, and in their basement, they actually had a bricked off slave tunnel.
Oh,
That was a
wow.
part of this network, and I got to see it with my own eyes. They since actually physically moved to the home and I think buried it, but people would come to see it. And I just seeing it as a little kid,
Hmm.
really, because I think the farther away we get from historical events, they start to seem, you know, less and less real, I guess. And so
Right.
seeing that with my own eyes as a kid, just that, I mean, just bricked off tunnel really left a mark on me. And so I've really tried to, I would actually be curious to hear from both of you about how, who you're sort of, who you look up to from the, you know, when we're talking about Black History Month and role models. For me, it's Harriet Tubman. And so this summer we were up near where her childhood home was. And while I can't show my children the bricked off tunnel in my aunt and uncle's basement, I was able to show them her home. And she was a woman that I do hope one day her face will be on the $20 bill,
Hmm.
because she was just such an extraordinary hero, all the men and women that she smuggled into freedom. But um, teaching my children about, role models like her, I find to be sort of the best way to broach the issue. But how did you teach your children about, the difficult topics, and who are some of the specific role models that you use to talk about those, the difficult issues?
Well, one of the people that I have admired for a long time, and Mary, she will probably resonate with you because it's another Chicago person, and it's Marva Collins. And
Mm.
she went into the inner city schools where people were testing very poorly, and she decided to teach the classics. And I saw this segment on 60 Minutes. This was probably, I don't know, like 35, 40 years
Yeah,
ago.
I know the one you're talking about, Betsy. Yeah.
And it was just amazing. And she would pull these kids in, and they'd say, "Who's your favorite author?" And they say, "Ralph Waldo Emerson." And there was a famous TV movie which featured Cecily Tyson as
Hmm.
Marva Collins and Morgan Freeman as her husband. But I bought the book and I just loved it. And I thought this is really a testament to the spirit of people who are not afraid to go in and teach excellence, and that given the right conditions, even in the poorest of circumstances, people can thrive with a really good teacher who believes in them, and who teaches classic American literature.
Yeah. I mean, I think of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, when you consider he was born in a house that didn't even have indoor plumbing. That's the kind of poverty he was born into. But he credits, the Catholic sisters who taught him in grade school. And if I'm recalling the story correctly, there was one time he turned in a paper or something and it was very sloppy work. He just, he was angry and he didn't want to do the work. And she said to him, "Clarence, you ever turn in something like this bad again? I'm going to have a talk with your grandfather, and there's going to be trouble. You are more than this." And just that moment, he said, when someone recognized how smart I was and held me accountable and said, "Clarence, you will not turn this in again. You can go and do whatever you want. wherever you want, you have that, you're that gifted. And, sometimes it takes one teacher, right? Or one person in someone's
Mhm.
life to say, I'm not teaching down to you. You are smart enough to read Ralph Waldo Emerson, right? You're smart enough to go to Harvard's medical school, Millie Jefferson. So it just shows you the power of person to person contact and the inspiration that one person can give to another by not, I don't know, defining their expectations down.
I so agree, and I love Clarence Thomas. I love his autobiography, My Grandfather's Son, a memoir.
Hmm.
I read the autobiography. I was pretty young when I read it, and I had just moved to Washington, and it really left a mark on me because of all that he achieved, despite, growing up in abject poverty, not necessarily living in a stable two-parent home, and then what he went through politically to get where he
Hmm.
is today. And he is someone who could be excused for being a real bitter and angry person.
Hmm.
The personal smear on him, being called an Uncle Tom, and he's just the most gracious and warm. I've had the privilege of meeting him a couple of times, and he's the most gracious, warm person who speaks. I mean, the thing that marks his memoir is gratitude. He just has gratitude for the people like his grandfather and these teachers who, um, you know, raised him to
Hmm.
achieve despite it all.
Right.
And we're just so fortunate to have him on the Supreme Court and have him as a model.
Well, Ashley, one of the things that you said about what do we do, and I was trying to think of something, and it's really kind of just cultural that part of my husband's conversion story was being on an airplane and talking to someone about jazz, and he loves jazz, but had played a lot of jazz growing up in our home, and I just think the achievements of Ella Fitzgerald and John Coltrane and a lot of great musicians that we loved. And one of our sons became a sort of an amateur jazz pianist. And that was a big contribution in American culture to the richness and the tapestry that they wove into our culture.
Hmm. Well, I don't know if any of you saw a recent 60 Minutes segment on a Catholic girls' school in New Orleans named or was founded by Mother Henriette DeLille, who I know is one of the Black saints who is currently her cause for canonization is underway. But it's a Catholic school for it's all Black girls who attend it, and I think an all Black faculty as well. And these two seniors at this high school managed to solve a Pythagorean theorem problem that has remained unsolved for like 2,000 years. And two high school students.
Wow.
It's an astounding story. And if you just Google Catholic girls in New Orleans solve Pythagorean theorem, it's just a magnificent story. And, again, their math teacher she said, I knew these girls were smart. We hold them to very high standards here. Like, they really bring out the best in these girls. And she said, I was just looking for ingenuity. And then when I realized they had actually solved this, she said I couldn't believe it. And so they were very briefly, internet stars, and Michelle Obama gave them a big shout out and stuff. But it shows you again the power of a teacher, but also the power of Catholic education and the way in which it shaped Clarence Thomas, the way in which it shaped these two girls who I don't believe are Catholic themselves, but who had the experience of having their God-given abilities brought out um, by others who see them as, the gifted human beings God created them to be.
Another one comes to mind is Katherine Johnson. My daughter did a project on her last year. She was the African American woman who basically like solved the NASA coding to get us to the moon. And in
Hmm.
fact, the movie Hidden Figures, have you both seen that movie?
Yes,
I loved
one.
that
It's a
movie.
favorite. Yeah.
It's a great movie. It's
Terrific.
it's a great movie for girls, especially. But I just love her story, and I loved seeing how inspired my daughter was by her, by just this math genius, and the fact that she was able to, solve this riddle that ended up getting us to the moon. So, well, so many, we could probably go on and on of all the different men and women that whose lives and legacies are worth celebrating in Black History Month. And so I thank you both for spending a little time just talking about their legacies and the way they've shaped our culture for the better. So thank you both.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
And now Father Roger Landry offers us a thought-provoking homily to prepare us for this Sunday's Gospel.
This is Monsignor Roger Landry, National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies in the United States. It's a privilege for me to be with you as we enter into the consequential conversation Jesus wants to have with us in this Sunday's Gospel. For the last 5.5 years, over the course of exactly 300 weeks, we've had the privilege together to enter into a conversation with Jesus in the Gospel. Today will be the last homily in this series. I thank all of you who have listened since May of 2019 and who have sent me emails or approached me across the country to express your appreciation. I've very much enjoyed this part of my week and breaking open God's Word with you. I will remain part of Conversation with Consequence and regular dialogues with our great co-hosts. In this Sunday's Gospel, we prayerfully penetrate into the vocational dialogue Jesus had with St. Peter on the seashore of Galilee. This conversation is so pivotal to the Catholic faith that in 2001, when St. John Paul II was giving us his pastoral plan for the third Christian millennium, he took the motto for the 1,000-year period of Christianity that we were about to begin from Jesus' words to Peter in this Sunday's Gospel scene, Duc in altum in Latin. Put out into the deep water and lower your nets for a catch. St. John Paul II was convinced that these words aptly describe the world situation and what needs to be our response. When we examine the Sunday's Gospel more closely, we see why. Early one morning, Jesus was at the shore of the Sea of Galilee teaching. As more people began to awaken and come down to the shore, the crowd listening to Jesus grew. Jesus asked Simon Peter to borrow his boat so that he might sit a little bit away from the shore to teach the crowds. With the wind coming over his shoulder as a natural amplifier, Jesus nourished the famished crowds with his words. But it was no coincidence that Jesus was there that morning. It was no coincidence that he asked to borrow Simon's boat. Jesus had come to do more than teach the crowd. He had come to catch a big fish. He had come to convert and call Simon. After Jesus had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and lower your nets for a catch." Few statements could have sounded more ridiculous to a fisherman. Simon Peter must have had to control himself from saying something unkind. He was a professional in the Sea of Galilee. Like all other fishermen, he knew that fish were successfully caught in shallow water at night, not in deep water in broad daylight. It would be as if a fisherman had told Jesus, a carpenter, to drive in nails by holding the head of the hammer and striking with the handle. It made no sense. Moreover, Peter was tired after a long night, frustrated that he had nothing to show for hours of hard work. He had just spent time cleaning all of his equipment to put everything away for the day. So it was probably the nicest way he could, he replied, "Master, we have worked all night, but have caught nothing." He likely looked silently into Jesus' eyes for understanding. But Jesus didn't flinch. He looked at Peter intensely without saying a word. What was going on in Peter's mind? No one had ever spoken like this one, Peter might have been whispering to himself. Is it possible that he might know something I don't about fishing? Probably not, although how can I refuse what he asks and embarrass him and myself in front of the entire crowd? Peter finally conceded. "At your word," he told Jesus, "I will let down the nets." So he got into the boat again and paddled far away from shore to the deep water. Probably many of those who had listened to Jesus were watching to see how the drama would unfold. We know what happened. Peter and his companions won the fisherman's equivalent of the megabucks, catching so many fish that their nets were about to break and 2 boats were about to sink. Peter couldn't help but think, however, that he was unworthy of such a gift from God. Rather than run to Jesus, hug him, and thank him, he fell down at Jesus' knees and begged, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." He was afraid of what this blessing to such a sinner might mean. Jesus spoke right to Peter's heart and said, "Do not be afraid." Then he gave Peter his vocation. "From now on, you will be catching men." When they had brought their boats to shore, Peter, Andrew, James, and John left everything behind, their fishing vessels, their nets, the treasure they had just caught, and followed Jesus. And they went out on a worldwide fishing expedition. As we would see after the resurrection, when the Lord would renew Peter in his mission by recapitulating a wondrous draught to fish, Peter would catch 3,000 on Pentecost Sunday alone, putting out into the deep at the Lord's command and continuing to do so until he would proclaim it by his crucifixion 3 decades later in Rome. St. John Paul II proposed Jesus' imperative, put out into the deep water, is the motto for our life in the church in the third millennium, because so often we in the church today can feel that we're in St. Peter's sandals. In many areas of life, but particularly in spiritual concerns, we can work so hard and seem to have so little to show for it. In our prayer life, we can sometimes think that we're getting nothing out of it. With our call to spread the gospel, we can sometimes strive diligently to share our faith with a husband or wife, with kids, with siblings and friends, with co-workers and fellow students, and believe that we've made no progress. With regard to the culture that surrounds us, it's not uncommon for people to become exasperated, not knowing even where to begin to help our society become more moral. To each of us in these situations, Jesus says, like he said to Peter, put out into the deep water, trust in me. We might think that from a human point of view, what Jesus asks us to do makes little or no sense or would be a waste of time. We can think the odds seem so slim. Jesus, after all, says so many things that fly in the face of the common human way of looking at things. Happy are the poor in spirit. Blessed are you who are persecuted, unless you pick up your cross daily and follow me. Turn the other cheek. Forgive 70 times, 7 times. Heaven rejoices more for one repentant sinner. Unless you gnaw on my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. But to each of these, like Peter, we're called to say, Lord, at your word, I will lower the nets. To leave behind the security of the shore and of human wisdom, and to put out into the deep, trusting that all things are possible with God. So the first reason John Paul II proposed Duc in Altum as our motto is because it points to a trust in the Lord's words above every other factor. That even if we were to have all the expert consultants in the world on one side and Jesus alone on the other, we should trust Jesus. But that's not the only reason the Pope selected it. In it as well, we find very clearly spelled out what our Christian vocation and mission are in the midst of our time. The Lord Jesus calls each of us, as he called Peter, Andrew, James, and John, to be a missionary, a fisher of men, to go out to try to bring other fish into the salvation of Peter's boat, in which Christ is still sitting and teaching. Being a fisher of men is not the job only of priests and bishops, of nuns and catechists and Catholic school teachers, but of every one of the baptized. It's our mission as a Christian, flowing from our vocation. It's not enough for us merely to pray each day. It's not enough for us faithfully to live by Christ's commandments and then mind our business. Christ calls us to love our neighbor. And the greatest act of love we can do for our neighbor is to bring our neighbor to Christ and bring Christ to our neighbor. Just like in the gospel, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, the soon-to-be apostles, called to their friends in the other boat to come and help them. So the successors of St. Peter and the apostles are calling to us, their friends, to come to help them bring more and more fish into Peter's boat, to share in the task of the new evangelization. That's why St. John Paul II told us almost 25 years ago, at the beginning of the new millennium and at the close of the great Jubilee of 2000, during which we celebrated the 2000th anniversary of the birth of Jesus and a new stage of the church's journey, our hearts ring out with the words of Jesus when he invited the apostle to put out into the deep for a catch. Duc in Altum. Peter and his first companions trusted Christ's words and cast the nets. Duc in Altum. These words ring out for us today, he continued. We must look ahead. We must put into the deep, trusting in Christ's words. As this millennium begins, allow the successor of Peter to invite the whole church to make this act of faith. At Mass this Sunday, Jesus will get into Peter's boat, the symbol of the church, again. He will teach us, the crowds, from the pulpit. He knows how hard we've been working, how frustrated we may be by our failures, how sinful a man or a woman we are. But he trusts us as he sends us out again when we least expect it, to where we least expect it, to those who perhaps seem least open to the gospel. He wants to send us out to the deep waters in broad daylight as fishers of men, as hardworking collaborators in the mission to make disciples of all nations and every creature. To strengthen us for this mission, he will feed us with his body and blood. Let us humbly, like St. Peter, respond, Lord, at your word I will lower the nets, and with faith set out together to catch as many as possible for Christ. Thank you once again for the privilege of entering into the consequential conversation with Jesus over these last 300 weeks. May God bless you all.